Everyone knows the phrase, 6 feet under. It's how we talk about death itself. A grave dug exactly 6 feet deep, that's just how it's done. Except it isn't. And the real reason might surprise you more than you'd expect, because the most popular explanation, a famous plague law from London in 1665, might not even be real history. It may have come from something far less official. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly what's true, what's a myth, and why we quietly stopped digging that deep. In 1665, the Great Plague tore through London. Roughly 1 in 5 residents died. At the worst point, the city was burying 8,000 people a week. The Lord Mayor at the time, Sir John Lawrence, issued a long list of emergency rules to try to control the outbreak. Among them was a specific order that all graves be dug at least 6 feet deep. At the time, doctors believed disease spread through bad air rising from decomposing bodies, a theory called miasma. Burying bodies deeper would trap that air underground and stop it from infecting the living. It sounds logical for the time. It also turned out to be completely wrong. The plague was actually spread by fleas carried on rats, something nobody would understand for another 2 centuries. Here's where the story gets strange. The most famous record of this 6-foot order doesn't come from a government archive. It comes from a book called A Journal of the Plague Year, written by Defoe, the same author who wrote Robinson Crusoe. Defoe published it in 1722. He wrote it as if it were a first-hand diary of the plague. But Defoe was 5 years old when the plague actually happened. He never lived through it as an adult. The book is fiction, dressed up to look like a true account. There likely was a real mayoral order at the time. Historians have found supporting evidence. But the version most people know, the one that made 6 feet under famous, was popularized by a novelist writing 57 years after the fact, partly from his imagination. The phrase we use to talk about death may be famous because of historical fiction, not history itself. Even if the order was real, nobody recorded why 6 feet was the magic number instead of 5 or 8. The leading theory has nothing to do with disease at all. Historians believe 6 feet was simply about as deep as a person could dig without the soil walls collapsing in on them, and roughly as deep as an average gravedigger could comfortably toss dirt out of the hole without needing a ladder. In other words, the number may have been picked for convenience, then wrapped in the appearance of medical science. And even during the plague itself, it wasn't consistently followed. Mass graves for the poor were sometimes dug 20 feet deep. The 6-foot rule, real or not, was never the strict universal standard people imagine. After the plague ended, the deep grave habit mostly faded. Digging 6 feet by hand was exhausting and expensive, so graves crept shallower again. Then a new threat brought the depth back. By the early 1800s, medical schools needed cadavers for dissection, and supply was limited to executed criminals. A black market in stolen corpses exploded. Grave robbers, sometimes called resurrectionists, could dig up 4 bodies in a single night from shallow graves. Families terrified of having a loved one stolen and dissected started demanding deeper graves again, deep enough to make robbing them not worth the effort. 6 feet became popular for an entirely different reason than the plague. Fear of theft, not fear of disease. Today, neither fear applies. Embalming, sealed caskets, and concrete burial vaults make grave robbing essentially pointless. Most U.S. states only require about 18 inches of soil above a casket or vault, which usually works out to a grave around 4 feet deep, not 6. Land is part of it. Cemeteries, especially in cities, are running out of space. Shallower graves allow something called double-depth burial, 2 caskets stacked in the same plot, separated by a concrete slab. That's only possible because graves aren't dug a full 6 feet anymore. Environmental choices matter too. Green burials skip embalming chemicals and metal caskets entirely, using biodegradable materials instead. These are buried shallower on purpose because more oxygen near the surface speeds up natural decomposition, letting the body actually return to the earth instead of being sealed away like a time capsule. And there's no federal law in the US requiring 6 feet at all. Local health departments decide based on soil, climate, and practicality. Most land somewhere between 3 and 4 feet. So next time someone says 6 feet under, you'll know the real story underneath it. A plague order that may have been popularized by a novel. A number possibly chosen for convenience, not science. A depth that came back into fashion because of grave robbers, not disease. And a modern world that quietly walked away from all of it, for reasons that have nothing to do with the original myth at all. The phrase survived, the practice didn't. That's what we do at Unknown Behind Known Things. Find the real story behind the phrases and traditions you've never thought to question. Subscribe for more, and tell us in the comments, what everyday phrase or tradition should we dig into next?